Chapter 1. The body was found at precisely 8 minutes past midnight. The grand ballroom of Ashcombe Manor, filled with swirling laughter, the clinking of crystal glasses, and the hushed intrigues of high society, had just begun to empty when a dreadful scream shattered the night's elegance. Lady Beatrice Ashcombe, in a gown of deep emerald, had been the first to discover the scene. She stood frozen at the doorway of the Manor's private study, her hands trembling against the lace of her gloves. Inside, sprawled upon an ornate Persian rug, was Sir Reginald Whitmore, his face ghostly pale, his fine dinner jacket streaked with dark crimson. Dead. At his side, clutched between rigid fingers, was a small ivory envelope. The seal, an elaborate golden insignia, remained unbroken, yet the name written in precise, looping script sent a collective shiver through the gathering crowd. Monsieur Hercule Poirot. A thank-you note to the detective, written by a murderer détenu. Beatrice turned her gaze from the corpse to the assembled guests, each one cloaked in wealth, influence, and secrets. In the corridor, a footman ran for the telephone. The police would be summoned naturally. But as whispers of the tragedy spread like wildfire, an undeniable certainty settled over the room. Someone here was a killer, and only Hercule Poirot could uncover the truth. Chapter 2. Hercule Poirot arrived at Ashcombe Manor with the quiet efficiency of a man who had solved more murders than he cared to count. The mist rolled low over the vast estate as his car came to a halt before the grand entrance, where a cluster of pale-faced guests whispered in hushed tones. Poirot stepped out, smoothing the lapels of his impeccably tailored overcoat before adjusting the cuffs of his gloves. "Mon Dieu," he murmured, casting a critical eye over the gathering. "The air is thick with secrets already." Beside him, Inspector James McAllister of Scotland Yard let out a weary sigh. He was a broad-shouldered man with a perpetually furrowed brow, clearly unimpressed by Poirot's theatrical observations. "I suppose you'll want to take charge straight away?" McAllister grumbled. Poirot offered a polite but knowing smile. "Mais oui, my dear Inspector. The situation, she is delicate, no?" They were led inside by a butler with the solemn dignity of a man accustomed to tragedy, but not yet hardened to it. The study, though grand, had become claustrophobic under the weight of so many onlookers. The scent of expensive tobacco and aged leather filled the air. Poirot moved with precise, deliberate steps toward the lifeless figure of Sir Reginald Whitmore. He took in every detail, the posture, the expression frozen in death, the untouched glass of whisky on the side table. But it was the ivory envelope, still clutched in the dead man's hand, that truly piqued his interest. He knelt carefully, slipping on a pair of pristine gloves before plucking the note free. The handwriting was delicate, yet deliberate. He turned the envelope over once, then twice. McAllister leaned in. "Well, open it!" Poirot tusked, wagging a finger. "Patience, mon ami. The note, it will still be here in a moment, but the scene, it speaks if one listens." He let his gaze travel slowly around the room, observing the arrangement of furniture, the faint smudge on the edge of the desk, the footprints in the thick carpet. Then, and only then, did he carefully break the seal and unfold the note. Its message was chilling in its simplicity. Merci, Monsieur Poirot. A thank you note from a murderer. Poirot's lips pressed into a thin line. His dark eyes flicked up to meet those of the assembled guests. Bon, he said softly. Let us begin. Chapter 3. The air inside Ashcombe Manor had grown heavy with tension. The gathered guests stood in small clusters, whispering behind gloved hands, stealing glances at Poirot and the lifeless form of Sir Reginald Whitmore. The thank-you note, now folded neatly in Poirot's hand, felt like a taunt, an invitation to a game only. He could win. He turned to Inspector McAllister, his voice low but firm. No one leaves, mon ami. Not until I have spoken with each of them. McAllister nodded, barking orders to the constables stationed at the entrance. Poirot, meanwhile, allowed his gaze to sweep across the room, settling on each face for a fraction longer than was comfortable. He saw what he always saw, nervous, fingers twitching at jewellery, eyes darting away at the moment of contact, lips pressed too tightly together. Guilt. But guilt for what? That was always the question. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back. Tell me, who was last to see Sir Reginald alive? A murmur passed through the crowd before a woman stepped forward. She was striking in a way that suggested careful effort. Auburn hair arranged just so, emerald earrings catching the light. Her gloved fingers toyed with the delicate chain of a pendant at her throat. I suppose that would be me, she said. Her voice was cool, steady. Poirot inclined his head. And you are? Vivian Harrington, a friend of Sir Reginald's. Ah. Poirot's moustache twitched. And how did you part, Mademoiselle Harrington? She hesitated, just for a moment. We spoke in the ballroom. He seemed distracted, agitated even, but he wouldn't say why. He left rather abruptly. And you did not follow? A faint smile touched her lips. It was a party, Monsieur Poirot. I assumed he needed a moment alone. Poirot tapped a finger against his chin. And yet he was not alone for long. From the far end of the room, a sharp voice cut in. No, he was not. All heads turned toward the speaker. A man, tall, silver-haired, with the rigid posture of a military officer, stepped forward. His expression was unreadable, but something in his stance suggested an eagerness to be heard. Colonel Archibald Lennox, he introduced himself. I went to see Whitmore just before midnight. Had business to discuss. Business? Poirot echoed. A personal matter? Lennox's jaw tightened. One I would rather not discuss in mixed company. Poirot's dark eyes gleamed. Ah, but murder, mon colonel, is rarely a private affair. A flicker of irritation crossed Lennox's face, but he said nothing. Poirot clasped his hands together. Then, we have it. 2 people who saw Sir Reginald before his death. But tell me, did either of you hear or see anything unusual? Vivian shook her head. No. Lennox hesitated before answering. I heard something, he admitted finally. After I left him, just before midnight, a sound, like the rustling of fabric, followed by a soft thud. Poirot nodded, storing the detail away. And yet, you did not return? Lennox's expression hardened. I assumed it was nothing. A man shifting in his chair, dropping a book, any number of things. Poirot turned the thank-you note over in his hands. And yet, it was not nothing, was it? The question hung in the air, unanswered. Poirot let the silence stretch before speaking again. "Very well, mes amis. I will interview each of you in turn, and then we shall see who among you is playing a game most deadly." With that, the first round of interviews began. Chapter 4. Poirot chose to begin his interviews in the drawing-room, a lavishly decorated space filled with gold-trimmed furniture and a heavy, brooding fireplace. The fire crackled softly, casting shifting shadows along the velvet drapes. Inspector McAllister stood nearby, arms crossed, watching each suspect enter with the scrutiny of a man who had little patience for subtlety. The first to sit opposite Poirot was Vivian Harrington. She folded her hands neatly in her lap, her emerald earrings swaying slightly as she exhaled. Poirot studied her for a moment before speaking. "Mademoiselle, you say Sir Reginald seemed agitated when last you spoke?" She nodded. "Yes, distracted, as if something weighed on his mind, and yet he confided nothing in you." Her lips curved faintly. "Sir Reginald was a man of discretion, Monsieur Poirot. He did not share his troubles easily." Poirot tilted his head. "And did this trouble concern you, perhaps?" For the briefest moment, something flickered in her eyes. Then she smiled. "If it did, I was unaware. Tell me." Poirot leaned forward, fingers steepled. "Were you fond of Sir Reginald?" Her expression remained unchanged, but the way her fingers tightened around one another did not escape Poirot's notice. "We were close," she admitted, "but not in the way you're suggesting." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Ah, I suggest nothing, mademoiselle. I merely observe." Vivian's gaze did not waver, but Poirot knew when a person was carefully choosing which truth to reveal. He would return to her later. With a polite nod, he dismissed her and called in Colonel Archibald Lennox. The man sat stiffly, as if he was still in a military tribunal rather than an inquiry about murder. Poirot noted the way his hands rested flat on the armrests, controlled, deliberate. "You say you visited Sir Reginald just before midnight," Poirot began. "And what was the nature of your conversation?" Lennox's jaw clenched. "A private matter, Colonel," Poirot said mildly. "A man is dead, and he had in his possession a note addressed to me, written by the murderer. I believe we can agree that nothing here is private anymore, n'est-ce pas?" Lennox exhaled sharply, through his nose. "It was a financial disagreement." "Ah," Poirot's moustache twitched. "And who owed whom?" Lennox hesitated. "Sir Reginald had assisted me in a personal matter some months ago. He expected repayment sooner than I could provide." "A debt, then?" The Colonel's eyes darkened. "A favour, Monsieur Poirot. One I fully intended to settle." Poirot drummed his fingers against the armrest. "And yet you argued?" Lennox's silence was confirmation enough. Poirot shifted, choosing his words carefully. "Tell me, mon colonel, did you see the envelope in Sir Reginald's possession when you left him?" Lennox frowned. "No." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "And yet, moments later, he was dead, with a note written to me. A curious thing, no?" Lennox did not respond. Poirot leaned back, studying the Colonel's expression. "One final question, mon colonel. Where did you go after leaving Sir Reginald?" "To the billiard room," Lennox answered swiftly. "Several guests can confirm it." Poirot tapped a finger against his chin. The alibi was plausible, but there were always ways around such things. He dismissed Lennox and continued with the next interview, each revealing fragments of a puzzle not yet fully formed. It was only when he reached Lady Beatrice Ashcombe that a new thread presented itself. She entered with careful grace, her gown whispering softly against the polished floor. Despite her composed exterior, Poirot noted the slight tremor in her fingers as she adjusted her pearls. "Madame," he greeted warmly, "you discovered the body, yes?" She nodded. "Yes. I went to fetch my shawl from the study and found him there, just lying on the floor." Her voice wavered slightly. "And the note?" Poirot pressed gently. "I didn't see it at first," she admitted. "Only after I called for help did I notice it in his hand." Poirot watched her carefully. "And did you touch anything, Lady Ashcombe?" Her eyes widened. "No, I swear it. I hardly dared to step closer." Poirot considered this. Either she was telling the truth, or she was a remarkably skilled liar. "Truth, me, Lady Ashcombe," he said finally. "Do you know of any reason why Sir Reginald might have written my name before his death?" She hesitated, and in that hesitation Poirot found his answer. I don't know," she whispered, "but I think he knew something dangerous." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "And did he confide in you?" "No," she admitted, "but earlier that evening he told me he had one final matter to resolve." Poirot's moustache twitched. "Did he, indeed?" Lady Beatrice bit her lip. "Monsieur Poirot, I believe Sir Reginald was afraid." Poirot sat back, turning her words over in his mind. A man, moments from death, leaving behind a note of gratitude. A man afraid, with one final matter to resolve. Poirot had solved enough cases to know. This was no ordinary murder. Someone in this house had planned it meticulously, and yet the very act of planning had left them vulnerable. Poirot would find the cracks. He always did. Chapter 5. Poirot sat alone in the study, his keen eyes drifting over the crime scene once more. The fire in the hearth had long since died, leaving only cold embers and the faint scent of smoke lingering in the air. Outside the manor, the night stretched silent, yet within these walls, secrets whispered beneath the surface. He had interviewed the key witnesses, Vivian Harrington, Colonel, Lennox, Lady Beatrice, and each had given him something, not the truth perhaps, but pieces of it. Sir Reginald had been afraid. He had one final matter to resolve. And yet his death had been followed by an impossibly polite note of thanks. Poirot ran a finger along the edge of the desk, stopping where a smudge of something, perhaps ink, perhaps powder, rested just out of place. He would return to that later. For now, he had something more pressing to address. The guests of Ashcombe Manor had been gathered in the drawing-room. Their conversations had grown uneasy, their patience stretched thin. When Poirot entered, a hush fell over the room. "My dear friends," he said smoothly, adjusting his cuffs, "let us speak of human nature, yes?" McAllister let out a grunt. "Poirot, is this really necessary?" Poirot turned to him with a patient smile. "Ah, mon cher McAllister, to solve a crime, one must understand the mind behind it. And to understand the mind, one must observe, question, and above all, listen." He pivoted to face the guests, his gaze sweeping across them like a searchlight. Let us consider what we know. Sir Reginald was killed in his own study, where he believed himself to be safe. He held in his hand a letter that, curiously, he had no time to deliver, a letter of thanks. He paused for effect, letting his words settle over them. Now, ask yourselves, mes amis, who among us has ever written a letter of gratitude at the very moment of their demise? No one answered. A few exchanged uneasy glances. Poirot pressed on. Does it not strike you unnatural to thank a man for catching your murderer before your own life has even left your body? A rustle of discomfort passed through the room. So, Poirot continued, what do we conclude? Either Sir Reginald foresaw his own death and penned this note in advance, which is improbable, or someone else wrote it. Silence. Poirot's gaze locked onto Colonel Lennox. Mon Colonel, you told me you heard a rustling sound after you left Sir Reginald. Fabric against fabric. A soft thud. What do you suppose it was? Lennox stiffened. I assumed it was nothing. Ah! Poirot's moustache twitched. But assumptions, mon colonel, are dangerous things. He let the words hang for a moment, then turned toward Lady Beatrice. And you, Lady Ashcombe, you did not see the note at first, no? She shook her head. No, not until I called for help. Poirot inclined his head. Curious, a man gripping a letter so tightly, yet it escapes notice? Unless, of course, it was not there to be seen at first. A hush fell over the room. Poirot let his words settle before continuing. What I propose, mes amis, is simple. The note, this peculiar, impossible note, was placed there after Sir Reginald's death. A gasp rippled through the guests. But why? Poirot asked, feigning innocence. Why would a murderer do such a thing? He clasped his hands together. Ah, because it was meant to mislead, to divert, to toy with me, perhaps, Vivian. Harrington shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Then you believe the killer remained in the room after the murder? Poirot smiled. But of course, to compose such a note they needed time, and I suspect, he glanced toward McAllister, that we will find fingerprints on the envelope. McAllister nodded to a constable, who hurried off to check. The inspector frowned. If you're right, Poirot, then we're dealing with a killer who wanted to challenge you. Poirot nodded. A most dangerous kind, mon ami. A murderer who believes themselves clever. He turned back to the guests, eyes sharp. But cleverness, mes amis, is a double-edged sword. And our murderer, for all their cunning, has made a mistake. He let the silence stretch, watching their reactions, before delivering his final statement of the evening. Because only a guilty mind would think to write a thank-you note before being caught. With that, Poirot bid them all bonne nuit and retired to his room. Tomorrow, the real hunt would begin. Chapter 6. The morning light crept hesitantly through the tall windows of Ashcombe Manor, casting long golden streaks across the drawing-room floor. Poirot sat at the breakfast table, delicately spreading marmalade onto his toast, his eyes lost in contemplation. Across from him, Inspector McAllister stirred his tea with impatient, jerky motions. "You're taking this rather lightly, Poirot," McAllister grumbled. "We've a murderer in the house, and you sit there buttering your toast as if it were any other morning." Poirot dabbed the corners of his mouth with a napkin before responding. "Mon cher McAllister, The mind, she works best when the stomach is satisfied. A crime? It is like a puzzle, yes? One does not force the pieces together. One finds the pattern, the logic that binds them. McAllister let out an exasperated sigh. Well, I hope that logic of yours comes quickly. The constables checked the note last night. No clear fingerprints, just smudges. Someone wiped it clean before placing it in the victim's hand. Ah! Poirot nodded, as if he had expected no less. Then we deal with one who is careful, meticulous, a planner. McAllister folded his arms. But why the note at all? If the murderer wanted to be careful, wouldn't it be simpler to leave no message? Poirot's eyes gleamed. Non intention, mon ami. You see, there are two types of murderers. Those who wish to remain invisible, and those who wish to be seen, but not caught. Our culprit, I believe, is the latter. McAllister frowned. A show-off. A gambler, Poirot corrected. A player of games, and like all players, they have a weakness. McAllister took a sip of tea. And what's that? Poirot smiled. They believe themselves cleverer than everyone else. A knock at the door interrupted them. A constable entered, his expression stiff. Sir, we've found something. Poirot and McAllister followed him down the hall, where another officer waited outside the study. During the second sweep of the crime scene, we found this, the officer said, holding up a small glass vial. Poirot took it between his fingers, inspecting the faint residue inside. Ah, mon Dieu! McAllister's brow furrowed. What is it? Poirot held the vial up to the light. A trace of belladonna. Deadly nightshade. McAllister swore under his breath. Poison! Poirot nodded. But our victim, he was stabbed, n'est-ce pas? Why then, the poison? The inspector frowned. Maybe the murderer tried poisoning him first, but it failed, so they resorted to the knife. Poirot's fingers tapped against the glass thoughtfully. Or perhaps, mon ami, the knife was meant to mislead us. Perhaps, in truth, Sir Reginald was already dying before the blade touched him. McAllister's eyes widened. You think he was poisoned first? Poirot inclined his head. It is possible, no? A single drop in his whisky, perhaps, administered by a hand he trusted. And when the poison took effect, the killer staged the stabbing to direct suspicion elsewhere. McAllister muttered a curse. But then that means... Poirot's voice was soft but certain. That someone in this house planned Sir Reginald's death long before last night. A deep silence settled between them. Poirot glanced at the assembled guests now lingering in the main hall, feigning patience as they waited for the investigation to unfold. One among them had set this plan into motion. One among them had calculated each step with precision. Poirot adjusted his cuffs. It is time, I think, to begin asking the questions that truly matter. McAllister raised an eyebrow. And what are those? Poirot smiled. Not who held the knife, but who wished Sir Reginald dead long before it was used. With that, he stepped forward, ready to unravel the mind of a murderer. Chapter 7. The air inside Ashcombe Manor had grown heavier, thick with unspoken fears and guarded glances. Poirot stood at the centre of the drawing-room, his presence commanding but unassuming. He was not a man of brute force or authority, yet his mere gaze had a way of making people uneasy. of forcing them to measure their words before speaking. Inspector McAllister stood beside him, arms folded, his jaw tight with impatience. "All right, Poirot. You said we should stop asking who held the knife and start asking who wanted Sir Reginald dead long before. So let's hear it. Who had the motive?" Poirot's moustache twitched as he turned to face the assembled guests. "Ah, mon cher McAllister, motives are the bones of a crime, yes? But a clever murderer does not parade their motive for all to see. No, no. They bury it deep beneath misdirection, beneath false alibis and polite conversations. But—" he raised a finger. "The past she does not forget so easily." His gaze flicked to Vivian Harrington, who sat with perfect poise, her expression unreadable. "Mademoiselle, you said Sir Reginald was distracted the night of his death, oui?" Vivian nodded. "That's right." "And yet you did not think to ask him why." She hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Men in high society always have their worries, Monsieur Poirot. One learns not to pry." Poirot inclined his head. "Ah, but I wonder, mademoiselle, did you not already know the cause of his distraction?" A flicker of something passed through her emerald eyes, but it was gone in an instant. "I have no idea what you mean." Poirot let the silence stretch before he turned to Colonel Archibald Lennox. The man's rigid posture betrayed his unease. "Tonton, Colonel," Poirot continued smoothly, "you owed Sir Reginald a debt, did you not?" Lennox's jaw tightened. "A personal matter." Poirot nodded. "But let us consider. What if the favour he did for you placed him in danger? What if the debt was not merely one of money, but of silence?" Lennox's lips pressed into a thin line. "I have nothing to say on the matter." "Ah, but that is where you are mistaken, mon colonel," Poirot countered. "For silence, you see, it says everything." McAllister huffed. "That's all well and good, Poirot, but we still don't have proof of a motive strong enough for murder." Poirot clasped his hands together. "Ah, but we do, mon ami." He turned to Lady Beatrice Ashcombe, who sat stiffly, her fingers wrapped tightly around the arms of her chair. "Madam," Poirot said gently, "last night you told me that Sir Reginald had one final matter to resolve." Lady Beatrice's throat moved as she swallowed. "Yes. And yet you did not seem surprised that he was killed before he could resolve it." A muscle in her jaw twitched. I don't know what you're suggesting." Poirot tilted his head. "Do you not, Lady Ashcombe?" The room held its breath. Poirot tapped a finger against his chin. Sir Reginald was a man of influence, no? A man who knew things others wished to keep hidden. It is no coincidence, I think, that he spoke of resolving a matter, and then, mere hours later, was dead. He turned to the group as a whole. What was it, mes amis, that Sir Reginald had discovered? What truth was he about to reveal? No one answered. Poirot smiled. "Ah, but you see the truth. She is like a candle in the dark. No matter how desperately one tries to smother her, she will always leave behind the scent of burned wax." He turned back to Lady Beatrice. "Tell me, madame, what secret was Sir Reginald about to expose?" Her fingers clenched tighter around the armrest. Then suddenly, before another word could be spoken, a crash sounded from the hallway. McAllister spun on his heels, hand flying to his holster. "What the—" Poirot, however, remained still. His dark eyes gleamed with understanding. The murderer had just made their move. Chapter 8. The crash echoed through Ashcombe Manor, followed by the unmistakable sound of hurried footsteps. Poirot remained still, his sharp eyes narrowing as McAllister bolted toward the hall, barking orders at the constables. The guests, startled, exchanged uneasy glances, their already frayed nerves now on edge. Poirot, however, did not rush. Instead, he moved with deliberate grace, stepping into the dimly lit corridor where McAllister was already kneeling over the source of the disturbance. A small wooden box lay shattered on the floor, its contents spilled. A collection of letters, old and worn, their edges yellowed with time. One of the constables picked up a torn envelope. "Sir, these are addressed to Sir Reginald." Poirot's moustache twitched. "Ah, then we are at last unearthing the past." McAllister exhaled sharply. Someone knocked this over. Someone who didn't want us finding these letters. Turned to the constables. "Search the house! Someone was just here!" The officers scattered, their boots echoing against the marble floors. But Poirot merely crouched beside the scattered letters, carefully retrieving one of them. His fingers traced over the faded ink, reading the elegant handwriting aloud. "To my dearest Reginald, as promised, I have enclosed the documents. They must remain hidden, for the truth is dangerous." Poirot's lips pursed. "Interesting." McAllister frowned. "What do you make of it?" Poirot did not answer immediately. Instead, he gathered several more letters, scanning their contents with meticulous attention. Each letter spoke in vague but urgent terms, mentions of a debt of honour, a concealed truth, and a growing fear. Poirot stood. "Mon cher McAllister, I believe we have found Sir Reginald's final matter to resolve." McAllister's eyes darkened. "And someone just tried to destroy it." Poirot nodded. "Oui, which means they are desperate. And desperation, mon ami, makes even the cleverest of murderers careless." A sudden confession, they returned to the drawing-room, where the guests had grown restless. Poirot, ever observant, noted the varying degrees of tension on their faces. Some feigned boredom, others masked concern. But one, just one, was visibly rattled, Vivian Harrington. Her fingers tapped anxiously against the armrest of her chair. Poirot watched her, letting the silence stretch until the weight of it became unbearable. Finally, she exhaled and rose to her feet. "This is absurd," she said, her voice steady, but her eyes betraying unease. "Sir Reginald was an old fool. If he had secrets, they died with him." Poirot smiled. "Ah, but that is where you are mistaken, mademoiselle." Vivian's jaw clenched. "And what, exactly, do you think you've discovered?" Poirot turned to McAllister. "Inspector, I believe it is time to reveal what was found near Sir Reginald's body last night." McAllister hesitated. "The vial." "Precisely." Poirot faced the room. "Sir Reginald was poisoned before he was stabbed. The knife, mes amis, was merely a distraction, a show." A ripple of shock passed through the guests. Poirot's eyes returned to Vivian. "Tell me, mademoiselle, would you care to explain why Belladonna was found in his study?" Vivian's expression did not change, but Poirot caught it. The faintest flicker of recognition in her eyes. McAllister stepped forward. "Are you accusing her, Poirot?" Poirot shook his head. "Not quite. I am merely inviting Mademoiselle Harrington to enlighten us." Vivian scoffed. This is ridiculous. You have no proof. Ah, Poirot interjected. But we do, mademoiselle. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small folded paper. This, he said, unfolding it with care, is a letter Sir Reginald wrote, but never sent. A letter in which he states quite clearly. Poirot cleared his throat and read aloud. I know the truth at last. She thinks she has won, but I shall not be deceived. The game ends tomorrow. A hush fell over the room. Poirot set the paper down. Would you like to guess who he was referring to, Mademoiselle Harrington? Vivian's face paled. This is nonsense. You have nothing. Poirot took a slow step forward. Then allow me to ask, where were you precisely, just before midnight? Vivian opened her mouth, closed it. Then suddenly she laughed, a short, humourless sound. What does it matter? She muttered. He's dead, isn't he? McAllister's eyes widened. Are you confessing? Vivian shook her head, her emerald earrings swaying with the movement. I'm saying that Sir Reginald Whitmore deserved everything that happened to him. Poirot watched her, his expression unreadable. Because he knew your secret, oui? Silence. Poirot's voice softened. What did Sir Reginald discover about you, mademoiselle? Vivian exhaled. Something that should have stayed buried. She looked around at the assembled guests, her lips curling into a faint, bitter smile. But I'm afraid it didn't. Confession had begun, but was Vivian Harrington truly the murderer? Or was she protecting someone else? Chapter 9a. Hush settled over the room. Every eye was fixed on Vivian Harrington, who stood motionless, her fingers grazing the edge of a side table as if steadying herself. The confession had come, not outright, but veiled, wrapped in words that hinted at guilt, yet danced around the truth. Poirot, ever patient, clasped his hands behind his back. Mademoiselle, you say Sir Reginald deserved his fate, that he knew something about you, but he tilted his head. What if I told you that, despite everything, I do not believe you to be the murderer? Vivian's breath caught, just for a moment. McAllister frowned. Poirot, she just admitted, non, mon ami. Poirot interrupted smoothly. She admitted resentment. She admitted fear. But fear, it does not make one a killer. No, no. Fear makes one desperate. Vivian's fingers curled into a fist. What are you saying? Poirot's gaze sharpened. I am saying, mademoiselle, that I do not think you killed Sir Reginald, but I do think you know who did. Silence. Poirot let the weight of his words settle. Shall we speak of secrets? He continued, his voice light but pointed. Let us start with the letters, the ones Sir Reginald kept hidden. They speak of a truth that must never be known, a truth that made him a target. He turned to the room, watching each face for a reaction. But what truth, mes amis? What did Sir Reginald uncover? His gaze flicked to Colonel Archibald Lennox, who sat stiffly, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair. Mon Colonel, your debt to Sir Reginald, it was not financial, was it? Lennox's expression darkened. I told you, Poirot. Oui, oui, Poirot interrupted, waving a hand. You said it was a favour. But a favour, mon Colonel, is a broad thing, and I suspect that what Sir Reginald knew involved you. Lennox's face remained unreadable, but his knuckles had turned white. Poirot's moustache twitched. Tell me, mon colonel, Where were you before the billiard room?" "I told you," Lennox said sharply. "I was with Sir Reginald. I left him just before midnight." "Ah," Poirot nodded. "And the rustling sound you heard, the soft thud you dismissed, tell me, mon colonel, are you certain it was nothing?" Lennox hesitated. I assumed—" "Non!" Poirot raised a finger. "You did not assume, mon colonel. You knew, because you were not alone in that corridor, were you?" Lennox's eyes flickered toward Vivian just for a second. But Poirot caught it. He turned back to Vivian. "Mademoiselle, when I asked where you were before midnight, you hesitated, but now I see you were with Colonel Lennox." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Vivian's lips parted, but she said nothing. Poirot pressed forward. "You were speaking in hushed tones, perhaps arguing, and when the Colonel left Sir Reginald's study, you remained." Charles exhaled sharply. "You have no proof." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Ah, but I do." He gestured to the shattered wooden box in the hallway. Someone who broke that box to destroy evidence. Someone who panicked. Someone who realized that Sir Reginald's letters held the very secret they wanted buried. His gaze flicked back to Lennox. "And you, mon colonel, were the last person to see Sir Reginald alive." McAllister's voice was low, firm. "Poirot, are you saying he's the murderer?" Poirot sighed. "No, I am saying he is hiding something, but he is not the one who wrote the note." Silence. Poirot let his eyes scan the room before landing on the one person who had remained far too quiet throughout the investigation. Lady Beatrice Ashcombe. Her back was straight, her hands perfectly still in her lap, too still. Poirot stepped forward, his voice gentle but unwavering. "Lady Ashcombe." She lifted her chin, her expression unreadable. "Why did you hesitate, madame?" Poirot continued. "When I asked if Sir Reginald had confided in you, Beatrice exhaled softly. "Because I did not know if I should tell you the truth." Poirot tilted his head. "And now?" She finally met his gaze. "The truth," she whispered, "is that Sir Reginald knew his killer." Another gasp rippled through the room. Poirot's voice was calm, measured. "And do you know who it was, madame?" Lady Beatrice's lips parted. Then a single gunshot rang out. McAllister lunged forward. Down! Poirot barely had time to turn before a body collapsed to the floor. And in that instant he knew the murderer was trying to silence the truth once and for all. Chapter 10. The gunshot echoed through Ashcombe Manor like a death knell. Poirot barely had time to register the movement before Colonel Archibald Lennox staggered forward, clutching his shoulder. A bloom of crimson spread across his jacket as he collapsed to the floor with a strangled gasp. "Mon Dieu!" Poirot rushed to his side as McAllister spun towards the source of the shot. The guests had scattered, gasps and screams filling the air. In the chaos, Vivian Harrington stood frozen, her hand still gripping a small silver pistol. McAllister raised his revolver. "Drop it, Miss Harrington, now!" Vivian's hand trembled. Her eyes darted from Lennox to Poirot, as if weighing her next move. Poirot's voice cut through the noise. "Low, steady! Mademoiselle, if you fire again, you will not be able to take it back." A flicker of hesitation. And then, with a slow exhale, Vivian's fingers loosened. The gun slipped from her grasp, landing on the floor with a dull clink. McAllister wasted no time. In seconds, constables had seized her, pulling her arms behind her back. Lennox groaned from the floor, his face pale from the wound. "You stupid woman," he rasped. Poirot knelt beside him, inspecting the wound. "You will live, mon colonel. But tell me, why did she shoot you?" Vivian's breath came in short gasps. Because he was about to tell you everything." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And that, mademoiselle, is why you are not the true murderer." Silence fell over the room. Even McAllister froze. Vivian's lips parted. "What?" Poirot stood, dusting off his cuffs. "You panicked, mademoiselle. A desperate act. But a true murderer, one who planned everything so carefully, would never be so reckless." McAllister's brow furrowed. "Then who is it, Poirot?" Poirot turned slowly, and his eyes landed on Lady Beatrice Ashcombe. The entire room stilled. Lady Beatrice sat perfectly upright, her hands delicately folded in her lap, but she did not speak. Poirot took a step toward her. "Madame, you told me that Sir Reginald was afraid. You told me he had one final matter to resolve. And yet, you did not seem surprised that he was murdered before he could do so." Her expression remained unreadable. "I told you." Poirot raised a finger. "No, you hesitated, because you knew the moment he spoke those words that he would not live to see the morning." McAllister stiffened. "Poirot, are you saying—" Poirot's voice was absolute. "Lady Beatrice Ashcombe murdered Sir Reginald." Gasps erupted around the room. Lady Beatrice's fingers curled slightly into the folds of her dress, but still she did not deny it. Poirot continued, his voice calm but relentless. "Madame, you were the only one who entered the study after Colonel Lennox left, the only one who had time to place the thank-you note in his hand." McAllister's eyes widened. "That's why the note was wiped clean. You wore gloves, didn't you?" Poirot nodded. "But there is more. The poison." He glanced toward the small glass vial they had found earlier. "You did not use the knife, no? You used belladonna, a slow poison, undetectable in a casual drink. And when he collapsed, you staged the stabbing to make it look like a crime of passion." The entire room was holding its breath. Poirot took one final step forward. "But you made a mistake, madam. The note! You wished to appear clever, to taunt me. But the very act of writing a thank-you note, before I even entered the case, was too perfect." He tilted his head. "Only a guilty mind would have anticipated my arrival." Lady Beatrice sat in silence. Then, at last, she exhaled softly. "Impressive, Monsieur Poirot." McAllister tensed. "So you admit it?" Lady Beatrice's gaze remained on Poirot. "Of course. What would be the point in denying it now?" McAllister gestured to his men. "Take her into custody." The constables moved toward her, but Lady Beatrice raised a hand. "There is no need for all that. I will go willingly." She rose gracefully, smoothing the fabric of her gown. Then she turned back to Poirot. "I must know," she murmured. "When did you truly suspect me?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Ah, madame, the moment you told me that Sir Reginald was afraid." A pause. "Because murderers do not fear their own crimes." Lady Beatrice held his gaze. Then, ever so slightly, she smiled. "Well played, Monsieur Poirot," and with that she allowed herself to be led away. Epilogue. The truth behind the murder. As the evening settled, Poirot and McAllister stood by the fireplace, reflecting on the case. McAllister shook his head. "Still don't understand why she did it? What was the secret Sir Reginald uncovered?" Poirot sighed. "It was all in the letters, mon ami. Lady Beatrice and Sir Reginald had once been, shall we say, involved, but there was more." He gestured toward the pile of letters they had retrieved. "Sir Reginald had evidence that Lady Beatrice had orchestrated the disappearance of her first husband." McAllister's eyes widened. "You mean she—" Poirot nodded. She had killed before, and she would not allow the truth to surface." McAllister exhaled sharply. "But why the thank-you note? Why risk writing something so obvious?" Poirot's expression darkened. "Because, mon ami, she wanted to challenge me." McAllister frowned. "So she knew she'd be caught." Poirot's gaze flickered toward the door where Lady Beatrice had disappeared. She was too intelligent not to know. But perhaps in the end she wished for a worthy opponent. A pause. Then Poirot smiled softly. "And I, mon cher McAllister, never disappoint." With that, he adjusted his cuffs, straightened his tie, and turned toward the door. Another case closed, another mystery unravelled, and another murderer who had underestimated Hercule Poirot. The end.